Charlotte Ashford had perfected the art of invisibility over 20 years of spinsterhood. At 40, she moved through ballrooms like a ghost, present but unseen, useful but unremarked upon. The spring of 1817 found her, as always, at her sister's side during the London season, a shadow in pale grey silk, while Lady Pemberton sparkled in emerald satin. The Carrington ball blazed with 1,000 candles, their light catching on jewels and champagne glasses. Charlotte stood near the refreshment table, a strategic position. From here, she could observe without being observed, serve punch to grateful dancers without engaging in conversation, and count the hours until she could retreat to her small room at Pemberton House. 40 years old. A voice carried across the marble floor, bright with the cruelty of youth. Can you imagine still attending balls at 40? Charlotte's hand stilled on the ladle. 3 debutantes clustered near the pillar, their faces fresh as spring roses, their futures bright with possibility. It's practically a funeral. Another giggled, adjusting her perfect blonde ringlets. Why does she even come? Surely she knows there's no hope. Perhaps she's desperate. The third suggested, her tone dripping false sympathy. How sad, really, to be so invisible that one keeps trying. The punch bowl blurred before Charlotte's eyes. She blinked rapidly, keeping her face composed. 20 years had taught her this much. Never let them see the wound. Charlotte. Her sister's voice cut through the humiliation like a knife. Lady Pemberton appeared at her elbow, face tight with displeasure. Must you hover by the refreshments like a servant? It's embarrassing. I thought to be useful. Charlotte replied quietly. Useful would be staying home. Caroline glanced around, ensuring no one of importance overheard. Your presence is becoming awkward. People talk, Charlotte. They wonder why you persist in attending events meant for young ladies seeking matches. I did not realize I required a match to exist in society. Don't be difficult. Caroline's fingers dug into Charlotte's arm. Just try to be less conspicuous, please. Charlotte nodded, throat tight. She moved toward the windows, seeking the shadows between the golden pools of candlelight. This was her life, tolerated but unwanted, useful but resented. She had long ago accepted it. Acceptance brought a certain peace, or at least the illusion of it. The evening air through the open terrace doors cooled her burning cheeks. She focused on breathing, on maintaining the careful composure that had become her armor. Beyond the glass, the Carrington Gardens spread in darkness, promising escape she could not take. Unmarried ladies did not wander dark gardens alone. Not that anyone would notice if she did. Remarkable, is it not? Charlotte startled. A man stood beside her, tall and dark-haired, his evening clothes impeccably tailored. She had not heard him approach, a humiliating lapse in her usual awareness. Forgive me, he continued, his voice deep and cultured. I did not mean to alarm you. You did not, sir. Charlotte's voice came steady, at least. I was merely distracted by the spectacle of enforced gaiety. A hint of amusement colored his tone. I find myself similarly distracted. There is something exhausting about rooms full of people performing happiness. Charlotte looked at him properly then. His face was handsome in a severe way, with strong bones and eyes that held intelligence rather than empty charm. Something about his bearing suggested rank, though she could not immediately place him. She had spent so many years unseeing that she no longer tracked the important personages of society. Most would call such observation cynical, sir. And you, madam, what would you call it? Accurate. The word escaped before Charlotte could stop it. To her surprise, he laughed. A genuine sound, not the practiced chuckle of social performance. Indeed, I knew the moment I saw you that you possessed uncommon sense. Charlotte's defenses rose immediately. Was this mockery? Some new form of entertainment at the spinster's expense? But his expression held no cruelty, only curiosity, and something that looked almost like relief. "I am Thomas Blackwood," he said, "the Duke of Ashbourne, though I confess the title feels more burden than honor on evenings such as this." Charlotte's breath caught. The Duke of Ashbourne. Widowed 3 years ago, one of the wealthiest men in England, the most eligible bachelor in London. And he stood here, speaking to her as if she were a person worth knowing. "Your Grace." She curtsied, mind racing. "Forgive me, I did not—" "Please." He raised a hand. "No apologies necessary. I approached you, Miss—" "Ashford. Charlotte Ashford. Miss Ashford." He inclined his head. "Would you grant me the honor of the next dance?" The ballroom seemed to tilt beneath Charlotte's feet. This could not be happening. Dukes did not ask 40-year-old spinsters to dance. They certainly did not do so while a room full of beautiful young ladies waited hopefully. "I fear you may have mistaken me for someone else, Your Grace." "I have not." His eyes held hers steadily. "I am asking you, Miss Ashford, if you are willing." Pride warred with disbelief. Every instinct screamed that this was either a mistake or a cruel joke. But something in his face, a loneliness she recognized, a weariness with pretense, made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I would be honored," she heard herself say. The Duke of Ashbourne offered his arm. Charlotte placed her hand upon it, feeling the solid warmth of him through his sleeve. As they walked toward the dance floor, she felt the room's attention shift and focus like a physical weight. Conversations stuttered and stopped. Fans froze mid-flutter. Every eye in the Carrington ballroom turned to watch the Duke of Ashbourne lead the unmarriageable Miss Ashford into a waltz. Charlotte caught sight of Caroline's face, white with shock, then red with fury. Her sister's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish drowning in air. The music began. The Duke's hand settled at Charlotte's waist, proper but present. They began to move. "You are causing quite the scandal, Your Grace," Charlotte said quietly. "Am I?" He sounded unconcerned. "I was under the impression I was merely dancing with an intelligent woman who sees through society's pretenses. If that constitutes scandal, society's priorities require examination. They will talk. Let them." He guided her through a turn with practiced grace. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, what do you think of Byron's latest work?" The unexpected question startled a genuine response from her. "I think he confuses darkness with depth and mistakes melodrama for meaning." His eyes lit with something that looked almost like delight. Finally, someone willing to say it aloud. They talked through the remainder of the waltz. Truly talked, not the careful verbal dance of ballroom small talk. Charlotte forgot to guard her tongue, forgot to make herself small and agreeable. The Duke asked her opinions and actually listened to her answers. He responded with observations that showed real thought, real engagement. When the music ended, Charlotte felt dazed, as if she had been holding her breath for years and only now remembered how to exhale. The Duke bowed over her hand. "Miss Ashford, I hope to see you again. Very soon. Your Grace, Charlotte's voice failed her. "Soon," he repeated firmly, and walked away, leaving Charlotte standing alone in the center of the dance floor while the entire ballroom stared. She made her way back to the shadows, heart pounding. Caroline appeared instantly, gripping Charlotte's arm hard enough to bruise. "What did you do?" her sister hissed. "What on earth did you say to him?" "Nothing. We merely talked." "Talked." Caroline's laugh was sharp with hysteria. "The Duke of Ashbourne does not merely talk to spinsters, Charlotte. This is madness, or mockery. Either way, you will stay far away from him. Do you understand? Charlotte nodded automatically, but her mind remained elsewhere. She could still feel the Duke's hand at her waist, still hear his voice asking her opinions as if they mattered, as if she mattered. It meant nothing, she told herself firmly. A moment of whimsy on his part, nothing more. By morning, he would have forgotten the odd spinster he danced with on a strange impulse. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, Charlotte allowed herself something she had not permitted in years. She allowed herself to hope. 3 days later, the Duke of Ashbourne appeared at Pemberton House. Charlotte was in the morning room when the butler announced him, her embroidery forgotten in her lap. Through the doorway, she heard Caroline's voice rise to a pitch that suggested panic barely contained. "Your Grace, what an unexpected— that is, we are honoured, of course, but, Charlotte, you have a visitor." Charlotte's hands trembled as she set aside her needlework. This was impossible. Dukes did not pay morning calls to spinsters. Yet when she entered the drawing-room, there he stood, hat in hand, looking perfectly composed while Caroline fluttered like an agitated bird. "Miss Ashford." He bowed. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all, Your Grace." Charlotte curtsied, hyper-aware of her sister's frantic gaze. "You honour our household." Edward Pemberton, Caroline's husband, stood by the fireplace, lips twitching with what might have been amusement. He was a kind man, if weak, and had always treated Charlotte with gentle courtesy. "I have come with an invitation," the Duke said. "I wondered if you might consent to join me for a drive through Hyde Park this afternoon. With proper accompaniment, of course." He glanced at Caroline. "Perhaps your lady's maid could serve as chaperone, Miss Ashford." The silence that followed felt endless. Caroline's face had gone through several colours, settling on a sickly grey. Edward cleared his throat meaningfully. "I would not wish to impose on your Grace's time." Charlotte began, heart hammering. It would be no imposition. The Duke's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It would be a pleasure." "She accepts." Caroline's voice came sharp and brittle. "Of course she accepts. 3 o'clock, Your Grace." "Perfect." If the Duke noticed Caroline's agitation, he showed no sign. "I shall return, then. Miss Ashford, I look forward to continuing our conversation." After he left, Caroline rounded on Charlotte, eyes blazing. "You will be on your absolute best behaviour. One word out of place, one moment of embarrassment, and I shall never forgive you. Do you understand?" "Yes, Caroline." "This is madness," her sister muttered, pacing. "Complete madness. What can he possibly want with you?" Edward's quiet voice interrupted. "Perhaps he enjoys her company, my dear." Caroline shot him a look of pure disbelief before storming from the room. At 3 o'clock precisely, Charlotte sat beside the Duke in his open carriage, her maid perched behind them, while London society watched from every corner of Hyde Park. The spring afternoon was beautiful, trees heavy with new leaves, but Charlotte barely noticed the scenery. Every nerve was alert, waiting for the moment when this strange dream would shatter. "You are very quiet, Miss Ashford," the Duke observed. "I am trying to understand what is happening, Your Grace." "What is happening?" he said gently. "Is that I am enjoying a drive with someone whose conversation I value. Is that so difficult to believe?" "Yes." The word emerged flat and honest. He was silent for a moment, guiding the horses along the path. "May I ask why?" "Because I am 40 years old, Your Grace. Because I am a spinster with no fortune and no prospects. Because I have spent 2 decades being invisible to everyone who matters. Because dukes do not notice women like me, and when they do, it is not with invitations to drive in Hyde Park." And yet here we are. His voice held no mockery, only something that sounded almost like sadness. "Miss Ashford, What if I told you that I am weary beyond measure of being noticed for all the wrong reasons? That I spent 20 years in a marriage where we performed affection without ever knowing each other? That my title has made me rich in acquaintances and desperately poor in genuine connection? Charlotte looked at him then, really looked. She saw the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the weariness he carried like a physical weight. "What do you want from me?" She whispered, "Honesty." The word came swift and certain. No performance, no pretense. You spoke your mind about Byron because you had forgotten to dissemble. It was the most refreshing thing I have heard in years. Most people find honesty uncomfortable, Your Grace. Most people, he agreed. But I am not most people, and I suspect neither are you. They drove in silence for a while. Charlotte felt something dangerous unfurling in her chest, hope, fragile and terrifying. "Tell me about your life," the Duke said. "Your real life, not the story you tell in drawing rooms." So she did. Charlotte told him about the years of watching younger women marry and start families while she faded into the wallpaper, about the small kindnesses that felt like enormous gifts, about finding meaning in books and gardens when the world of people became too painful. She told him things she had never spoken aloud, and he listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he truly heard her. In turn, he told her about his marriage, arranged at 22 to a woman he never learned to know, about the loneliness of shared rooms and separate lives, about his wife's death 3 years ago and the guilt he carried for feeling relief along with grief. "I have been alone ever since," he said quietly. "Not physically, of course. I am surrounded by people daily, but truly alone nonetheless." "I understand that," Charlotte said. "I have been alone in crowded rooms for most of my life." His hand moved as if to reach for hers, then stopped, remembering propriety and the watching eyes of Hyde Park. "Miss Ashford, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Your Grace." "Would you consider allowing me to call on you again? Not as a matter of duty or charity, but because I find myself hoping for more conversations like this one." Charlotte's throat tightened. "Your Grace, I fear you do not fully understand what you are asking. The scandal— I am 45 years old." He interrupted gently. "I have done my duty to society for over 2 decades. I think I have earned the right to pursue my own happiness, even if society finds it peculiar. They will say you are mad. Let them." He smiled then, transforming his severe face into something warm. "What do you say, Miss Ashford?" What could she say? That she was terrified? That she could not believe this was real? That some part of her, long dormant, was waking with painful intensity? "I say yes," she whispered. "Yes, Your Grace." A week later, the Duke invited Charlotte to Richmond. The request came by letter, formal but warm, suggesting a drive, followed by a walk through the gardens. Caroline nearly fainted when she read it. "Richmond," her sister breathed. Charlotte, that is practically a declaration of intent. Gardens, walks, this is courtship." "Don't be absurd." But Charlotte's voice shook. "He has simply been kind to me. Nothing more." "Kind." Caroline laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "The Duke of Ashbourne does not waste time being kind to unmarriageable women. Whatever this is, it is not kindness." But Charlotte went to Richmond, because refusing felt impossible. The Duke drove them himself, his matched bays eager in the spring sunshine. They left the city behind, and with it some of the weight of watching eyes. Richmond's garden spread before them in late spring glory. They walked slowly, Charlotte's hand resting lightly on the Duke's arm, her maid trailing at a discreet distance. Flowers bloomed everywhere, roses and lavender, honeysuckle and jasmine. The air smelled of growing things and possibility. "It's beautiful," Charlotte said softly. "It is." But the Duke was looking at her, not the gardens. "Miss Ashford, may I speak plainly?" Fear and hope warred in Charlotte's chest. "Please do, Your Grace. I told you my marriage was loveless. What I didn't tell you was how that failure haunts me." He guided her toward a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, its petals drifting like snow. They sat, the maid settling nearby but out of earshot. "My wife died, and I realized I had never truly known her. We shared a home, a name, even a bed occasionally. But we were strangers who happened to live together. She deserved better. We both did." Charlotte could not speak, could only listen as years of loneliness poured from him. "I swore that if I ever considered remarrying, it would be different. Real, based on genuine connection, not convenience or duty." He turned to face her fully. "Then I met you at that ballroom, and you spoke of Byron with such sharp honesty that I realized I had been starving for exactly that, someone unafraid to be real. Your Grace, Charlotte's hands twisted in her lap. "I must be realistic about my position. I am not young. I am not beautiful. I am not—" "You are honest," he interrupted firmly. "You are intelligent. You are kind without being weak, observant without being cruel. You have lived enough life to know yourself, which is rarer than you might think." His voice softened. "You are the first person in 3 years who has made me want to truly know another human being." Tears burned behind Charlotte's eyes. "This cannot be real." "Why not?" "Because women like me do not get this." The words burst from her, raw with decades of resignation. "We get to be useful, invisible. We get to serve punch at balls and entertain nephews and fade quietly into old age. We do not get dukes looking at us the way you are looking at me. It does not happen." "It is happening," he said quietly. "Charlotte. May I call you Charlotte?" She nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Charlotte, I am not a romantic man. I am practical, perhaps too much so. But I know what I want, and I want this. You. Real conversation, genuine connection, partnership built on understanding rather than obligation." He reached for her hand, a breach of propriety neither of them cared about in that moment. "I am asking you to believe that this is possible, that you deserve this." Charlotte looked at their joined hands, his large and warm around her smaller, trembling fingers. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe! But 40 years of invisibility had taught her caution. "I need time," she whispered. "To think, to be certain this is not some fever dream from which I will wake to find everything unchanged." "Take all the time you need." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "I am not going anywhere, Charlotte." They walked back to the carriage in silence. But it was a different silence than before, charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. When he returned her to Pemberton House, the Duke bowed over her hand, his lips brushing her gloved fingers in a gesture that sent heat racing through her. "Until next time," he said softly. Charlotte fled inside, heart pounding, and nearly collided with Caroline in the hallway. "Well?" her sister demanded. "What happened?" "Nothing happened. We walked in the gardens." "Charlotte." Caroline's voice dropped to a furious hiss. "The entire city is talking about you and the Duke. The gossip is relentless. They say he has lost his mind, that you have somehow bewitched him, that this is the most bizarre courtship London has seen in decades." "It is not a courtship." "Is it not?" Caroline's eyes blazed. "Then what is it? Because I am being laughed at, Charlotte. At my own gatherings, women whisper about my pathetic spinster sister who has deluded herself into thinking a duke could want her." The words landed like blows. Charlotte felt herself shrinking, the brief confidence of Richmond crumbling under her sister's fury. "This must stop." Caroline continued relentlessly. "You will write to the Duke and decline any future invitations. You will tell him you appreciate his kindness, but that you understand such attentions are inappropriate. You will end this before you humiliate us all further." "Caroline, I am not asking, Charlotte. This is my household, and I will not have it become a laughingstock because you refuse to accept reality. The Duke is either toying with you or temporarily mad, and either way, it will end badly. Protect what little dignity you have left and end it now." Charlotte fled to her room, Caroline's words echoing in her skull. She had been foolish to hope. Of course this was not real. Of course it would end in humiliation. She was 40 years old. Too old for fairy tales, too old for rescued princesses and happy endings. That night she wrote the letter. "Your Grace, I am deeply grateful for the kindness you have shown me these past weeks. However, upon reflection, I believe it would be best if we did not continue these outings. While I have enjoyed our conversations immensely, I am realistic about the nature of such attentions and the disparity in our stations. I hope you understand. With sincere gratitude, Charlotte Ashford." She sealed it quickly, before courage could fail her, and had it sent the following morning. For 3 days, there was silence. Charlotte told herself this proved she had been right. He had been relieved by her letter, grateful for an easy exit from an impulse he already regretted. The pain in her chest was simply the price of her brief stupidity. Then came the invitation to the Hartfield ball, and Caroline insisted Charlotte attend. "You will go," her sister said coldly. "You will show society that you understand your place and harbour no delusions about your prospects. You will be what you have always been, invisible and appropriate." Charlotte went because she had nowhere else to go, no other life to live. She dressed in her usual grey, styled her dark hair simply, and accompanied Caroline to the glittering ballroom with the resignation of a prisoner walking to execution. The Hartfield ballroom blazed with enough candles to rival the sun. Charlotte stood in her customary position near the wall, grey silk blending with the shadows, watching London society swirl past in a glittering river of colour and sound. Every face seemed to hold judgment tonight. Every whispered conversation felt aimed at her. She should never have hoped. Hope was a luxury for young women with futures, not for spinsters who should have learned their place years ago. A ripple moved through the crowd near the entrance. Conversations paused mid-sentence, fans froze mid-flutter. Charlotte looked up and felt her heart stop. The Duke of Ashbourne stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in black evening clothes, his presence commanding immediate attention. His eyes swept the room with clear purpose, and when they found Charlotte, they locked on with an intensity that made her breath catch. He crossed the ballroom directly toward her. No greeting to the host and hostess, no pause for the dozen people trying to catch his attention, no acknowledgement of the scandalous directness of his path. The crowd parted before him like water. Caroline appeared from nowhere, face pale with panic. "Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure. We were just—" He moved past her as if she had not spoken. Charlotte pressed back against the wall, trapped, terrified, unable to look away from his face. "Miss Ashford." His voice carried in the suddenly silent ballroom. "Forgive my frankness, but I can no longer continue this farce." Charlotte wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the wallpaper, to be anywhere but the centre of 300 pairs of staring eyes. This was her worst nightmare made real, public humiliation on a scale she could never have imagined. "Your Grace, please," she whispered. No. The word came gentle but implacable. I have spent 3 years in loneliness, telling myself that duty was enough, that I did not deserve connection because I had failed so completely at it before. I attended balls and endured matchmaking mamas and felt nothing but exhaustion. The ballroom was so quiet that Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Then I saw you, standing alone in this very sort of crowd, and you looked at the circus around you with such clear-eyed understanding that I knew instantly here was someone who saw the world as it truly was, not the performance, but the reality beneath. Your Grace, everyone is watching. Charlotte managed, voice shaking. Let them watch. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Let them see a man who has spent 45 years performing duty and propriety finally choose honesty instead. Let them see me declare, publicly and unequivocally, that I have found something precious, and I will not surrender it to their judgment. Tears spilled down Charlotte's cheeks. She could not stop them, could not hide them, could not maintain even the pretense of composure. You wrote me a letter, the Duke continued, his voice dropping but somehow still carrying through the silent room. You told me you were being realistic. But Charlotte, your realism is based on lies society has told you for 2 decades, lies that your age makes you worthless, that your unmarried state makes you invisible, that you deserve to fade into shadows and be grateful for scraps of kindness. He took her hand, and she did not pull away, could not have pulled away if her life depended on it. I am here to tell you that those are lies. You are brilliant and observant and honest to the point of pain. You have survived years of dismissal and remained kind. You see people clearly without becoming cruel. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How extraordinary? Charlotte shook her head mutely, unable to speak past the sob lodged in her throat. The world will call me mad for this. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, an intimate gesture performed before half of London's aristocracy. They will say I am eccentric or unwell or bewitched. Let them say it. I care nothing for their opinions when measured against the chance at genuine happiness. I am afraid, Charlotte whispered, the confession torn from her. So am I, he admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice broke something open in her chest. I am terrified of failing again, of not being enough, of losing what I have only just found. But I am more afraid of the alternative, of returning to loneliness because I was too cowardly to risk rejection. He drew her slowly toward the terrace doors. The crowd parted, shocked into paralysis. Charlotte moved with him in a daze, unable to resist, unable to think beyond the impossible reality of his words. The terrace was cooler, darker, the sounds of the ballroom muted by distance and stone. The Duke released her hand only to catch both of hers in his, holding them between them like a lifeline. Charlotte Ashford. His voice was steady now, certain. I am asking you to believe in possibility. To believe that 40 years was not the end of your story but merely the beginning of its best chapter. To believe that I am sincere when I say I want to know you, truly know you, every thought and opinion and dream you have spent decades keeping hidden. Why? The word emerged broken. Why me when you could have anyone? Because I do not want anyone. He said it fiercely with absolute conviction. I want you. I want mornings discussing books and evenings arguing about politics and nights with someone I actually know lying beside me. I want a partner who will be honest when I am being insufferable and who will challenge me to be better. I want someone who has lived enough life to know herself and what she wants. I do not know what I want, Charlotte confessed. I stopped letting myself want things years ago. Then let me teach you. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with devastating tenderness. "Let me show you that you deserve every happiness you have denied yourself. Let me court you properly, or as properly as I am capable of, given that I have already made a spectacle of us both." A laugh bubbled up through Charlotte's tears, startled and genuine. "That was not proper at all, Your Grace. Thomas." His eyes held hers with warmth that made her chest ache. "When we are alone, call me Thomas. And no, it was not proper, but it was honest, which I value far more highly." Charlotte looked at their joined hands, at his face open and vulnerable in the moonlight, at the ballroom full of shocked aristocrats visible through the glass doors. This was madness. This was impossible. This was everything she had learned not to hope for. But perhaps she was tired of being realistic. Perhaps 40 years of wisdom could include the wisdom to recognize a gift when it was offered. "Thomas," she said, testing his name on her tongue. It felt dangerously intimate, terrifyingly real. "What if I disappoint you? What if I am not what you think I am?" "Then we will be disappointed together and adjust our expectations accordingly." He smiled, the expression transforming his severe features into something warm and alive. "Charlotte, I am not asking you to be perfect. I am asking you to be real. You have already proven yourself a master of that. Society will never accept this. Society accepted my loveless marriage and called it appropriate. I find I no longer trust their judgment." His hands tightened on hers. "I am asking you to trust mine instead. Trust that I know what I want. Trust that I see you clearly and still find you extraordinary. Trust that this is real." Charlotte looked into his eyes and saw no deception, no mockery, no ulterior motive. She saw only sincerity and hope, and a loneliness that mirrored her own. She saw a man who had lived long enough to know the difference between performance and truth, who had been lonely in precisely the way she had been lonely, who wanted exactly what she had stopped letting herself want. She saw possibility. "Ask me," she whispered. Understanding lit his face. He released one of her hands to cup her face, his palm warm against her cheek. "Charlotte Ashford, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me spend the rest of my life knowing you and being known by you? Will you take a chance on this middle-aged duke who has finally learned that genuine connection matters more than anything society can offer?" The tears came again, but this time they felt different, cleansing rather than painful, releasing decades of resignation and grief and accumulated loneliness. "Yes," Charlotte breathed. "Yes, Thomas, I will." He kissed her then, soft and careful and utterly devastating. His lips were warm, his hands gentle on her face, and Charlotte felt something in her chest expand until she thought she might break open with the enormity of it. This was real. This was happening. At 40 years old, after 2 decades of invisibility, she was being seen. When they parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "I want to do this properly," he murmured. "Call on you, court you, give you time to be certain. But I needed you to know that I am certain. I have never been more certain of anything." "I am terrified," Charlotte admitted. "Good." He smiled against her temple. "So am I. That means this matters. That means it is real." They stood together in the moonlight while London society buzzed with scandal behind the glass doors. Charlotte knew there would be consequences, gossip, judgment, perhaps even ostracism from some quarters. Caroline would be apoplectic. The young debutantes would whisper with even more venom than before. But standing in Thomas's arms, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her palm, Charlotte found she did not care. Let them whisper. Let them judge. She had spent 40 years earning their approval and had received only dismissal in return. Perhaps it was time to stop seeking validation from people who would never see her worth. "We should go back inside," she said eventually. "Face the music, as it were." "Are you ready?" Charlotte thought about that. Was she ready to be stared at, to be the subject of every conversation, to have her life dissected by strangers? No, but she was ready to stop hiding. She was ready to be seen. "Yes," she said firmly, "I am ready." They walked back into the ballroom together, and the sight that greeted them was both gratifying and terrifying. Every face had turned toward the terrace doors. The silence was absolute. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, Edward Pemberton began to clap. The sound was startling in the quiet ballroom. Edward met Charlotte's eyes across the room and smiled, kind and genuine, and continued applauding. Slowly others joined, a few at first, then more, until a good portion of the ballroom was offering grudging acknowledgement of what they had just witnessed. Caroline looked like she might faint. The debutantes clustered together, whispering furiously. The matchmaking mamas appeared calculating, already adjusting their mental hierarchies to accommodate this unexpected development. But Charlotte barely noticed them. She was too busy looking at Thomas, who was looking at her as if she were the only person in the room worth seeing. 5 days later, Charlotte sat in the gardens at Richmond, the spring sunshine warm on her face. Thomas sat beside her on the stone bench, their hands intertwined between them in a way that still felt scandalous and wonderful. They were officially engaged. The announcement had appeared in the Times that morning, and Charlotte suspected London society was still reeling. Caroline had grudgingly accepted the situation, though she swung between mortification at the scandal and smug satisfaction at having a duchess for a sister. "You are very quiet," Thomas observed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I am trying to convince myself this is real," Charlotte admitted. "That I will not wake tomorrow to find it was all a dream." He shifted to face her more fully, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. The gesture was becoming familiar, and that familiarity felt like its own kind of miracle. "Charlotte, I have spent 3 years alone. Not lonely in the way you might think. I had plenty of company, plenty of people eager for my attention, but alone nonetheless, because none of them saw me. They saw the title, the wealth, the position. They saw what they wanted me to be." His eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "You see me, Thomas, the man who reads poetry at midnight and argues about philosophy and still grieves his failure at connection. You see that, and somehow, inexplicably, you have chosen to stay." "It is not inexplicable," Charlotte said softly. "You see me too, Charlotte. Not the spinster, not the burden, not the invisible woman serving punch at balls. You see the person I have been all along, the one no one else bothered to look for. Then we are fortunate beyond measure." He leaned closer, and Charlotte's heart began its now familiar racing. "We have both lived long enough to know how rare this is, how precious. I wasted so much time," she whispered. 20 years of making myself small, of accepting invisibility, of believing the lie that my life was already over. You did not waste it." His voice was firm. "You learned, you observed, you developed the strength and clarity that make you who you are. Those 20 years were not wasted. They were the foundation for this moment." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes again. She had cried more in the past 2 weeks than in the previous 2 decades. It was as if some dam had broken inside her, releasing years of suppressed emotion. "I am afraid," she confessed. "Afraid that I do not know how to be loved. That I will fail at this because I have no practice, no experience, no—" He kissed her, stopping the words with the gentle pressure of his lips. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm with understanding. Then we will learn together," he said simply. "Charlotte, my marriage taught me everything about duty and nothing about connection. I am no more practiced at this than you are, but I am willing to try, to fail, to try again, because the alternative, returning to that careful, lonely existence, is unthinkable. What if society never accepts us? Then society can go hang." He said it so matter-of-factly that Charlotte laughed despite herself. "I am serious. I have spent 45 years living for duty and reputation. I think I have earned the right to choose my own happiness, even if others find it peculiar." Charlotte looked at their joined hands, at the gardens blooming around them, at the man beside her, who had somehow seen through 2 decades of invisibility to the person beneath. She thought about the girl she had been at 20, full of hope and romantic dreams. That girl would have been overjoyed by this. A duke, a proposal, a fairy tale ending. But the woman she was at 40 understood something deeper. This was not about titles or wealth or social triumph. This was about being seen, being known, being chosen for exactly who she was rather than who she pretended to be. "I keep waiting for it to feel less miraculous," she said quietly, "for it to become ordinary, normal. But every time you look at me, every time you say my name, it still feels impossible." "Good." Thomas smiled, that warm transformation of his features that she was learning to cherish. "Let it stay impossible. Let us never take this for granted." A breeze moved through the gardens, carrying the scent of roses and new grass. Charlotte breathed deeply, feeling something settle in her chest. Not the resignation she had worn for years, but a different kind of peace. The peace of being exactly where she was meant to be. "Thomas," she said, testing his name again. It still felt intimate, still sent a small thrill through her every time she used it. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For refusing to let me hide. For being brave enough to choose connection over convenience." She squeezed his hand. "For teaching me that 40 years was not an ending. It was a beginning." His eyes softened with emotion. "Charlotte Ashford, you are going to be a magnificent duchess." "I have no idea how to be a duchess." "Neither do I, really." His smile turned mischievous. "But I suspect we will figure it out together. Scandalously, improperly, with far too much honesty for polite society." Charlotte laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "They will never forgive us for this, you know. The young ladies I usurped, the matchmaking mamas whose plans we disrupted, the gossips who declared me unmarriageable." "Excellent." Thomas pulled her closer. Propriety be damned in the privacy of the gardens. "Let them be scandalized, let them whisper, let them learn that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories are the ones they never saw coming." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Charlotte let herself sink into it. Let herself feel the warmth of his hands, the solid reality of his presence, the impossible truth that this man wanted her. Not despite her age, not despite her past, but because of the woman those 40 years had shaped her into. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Charlotte rested her head against his shoulder. Thomas's arm came around her, holding her close, and they sat together in the spring sunshine while the world spun on around them. "We should probably discuss practical matters," Charlotte said eventually. "The wedding, the settlements, where we will live. Later." His voice rumbled through his chest beneath her ear. "For now, let us simply be. 2 people who found each other against all odds, sitting in a garden, grateful beyond words for the improbable gift of genuine connection." Charlotte smiled against his coat. "That sounds perfect." And it was. Not because it was grand or dramatic or the stuff of fairy tales, but because it was real. Because after 40 years of being invisible, of being dismissed, of being told her story was already over, Charlotte Ashford had discovered something revolutionary. Her story was just beginning. The whispers at the grand ball had declared she would never marry at 40. But they had been wrong, because the Duke had asked for her hand, not out of pity or madness or momentary whimsy, but because he had seen in her exactly what she had been searching for in herself: worth, intelligence, strength earned through years of surviving invisibility. They sat together as the afternoon light turned golden, talking and laughing and planning their future. And when Thomas finally helped her to her feet, ready to return to the city and face whatever society had to say about them, Charlotte went willingly. She was no longer afraid of being seen. She was ready, at last, to truly live.